the question is that what is the difference between hysteretic response and backbone curve. So, maybe some of you may not be familiar with this word, backbone curve and then hysteretic response, hysteretic behavior maybe. You know, for any component, it can be a material, it can be a cross section, it can be a member, or it can be a full structure. Its nonlinear behavior is completely represented by both of these things. For example, if I talk about a beam and the primary action versus deformation curve for a beam element for flexure is moment versus curvature curve. For a particular material, it is stress versus strain curve, right. So, the general concept in structural mechanics is action versus deformation curve, action versus deformation. For every action there is a deformation, and that action is related to that deformation through a constant quantity called stiffness of that corresponding to that action, if that material is elastic, right. So, whether that there is a material, cross section, member or full structure, all four levels will have their own action and deformation curves, which are depicting or showing us their complete behavior. For example, just imagine a material with a given stress strain curve. So, stress strain curve is one example of an action deformation curve for material level, and it gives us a complete picture or complete life span of that material. How will it behave for all levels of strain, right. So, this curve, stress versus strain, is giving us the complete behavior of that material, at what level it will go into nonlinear range, at what level it will start having negative stiffness, or at what level it will start getting softened for the first time. All that information is available in that curve. If you, and that curve is actually obtained by having by testing that material actually. So, but that test should be by definition monotonic, which means that you apply strain or stress and you calculate the other quantity. For example, if you apply strain and calculate stress, so you get that curve, you apply it up till there is a complete failure of your material. But you can also get a more comprehensive behavior picture if you apply cyclic loading. If you apply some level of stress and then unload it and apply in the opposite direction, then reload, unload, reload, keep on doing that, and you will get what we call as the cyclic behavior or hysteretic behavior, right. So, the cyclic behavior, if you plot, is actually may look like this, right, something like this. The envelope of the cyclic behavior, ideally sometimes it match with the monotonic curve, right. Sometimes it does not match depending upon how much cyclic degradation your particular material have. But that monotonic curve, or that you can say the envelope of that cyclic curve, is sometimes referred to as the backbone curve, right. So, if I say that this curve actually is backbone, and the complete behavior, the cyclic behavior, is called hysteretic behavior. So, in essence, actually the complete cyclic nonlinear behavior for any material, cross section, member or structure can be described by a combination of both of these things, backbone as well as hysteretic behavior. So, backbone will tell how this component or material is going to behave if it is subjected to a monotonic loading causing its failure or nonlinearity, and hysteretic behavior will tell us how will it behave if it is subjected to cycles of repeated cycles of reversed cyclic loading, right. For a particular beam element, the relationship between moment and curvature is actually an example of action deformation curve. For one particular column, for example, the relationship between moment and the rotation of that column is the action deformation curve. So there are many examples of action deformation curves, and for real structure all of them are nonlinear actually, but we assume that some of those are linear for the sake of simplicity of analysis. So wherever you will be talking about the complete nonlinear behavior of any component, you have to actually provide both of these things, backbone and hysteretic behavior. So for example, if you want to model a material as nonlinear in any commercial program, it is not that you just have to provide the stress strain curve for that material only, you also have to attach a hysteretic behavior to that stress strain curve. So you are telling the program how this material is going to behave if it is loaded in a monotonic manner, and at the same time how the same material should behave if it is loaded with the repeated cycles of loading into different directions, both directions. So the hysteretic behavior is always attached to the main backbone curve. So the actual action deformation curve, monotonic one, is sometimes referred to as the backbone curve. Actually there is a specific reason why it is called backbone, because cyclic behavior is always it is always stick to that to that backbone, to that monotonic curve. So actually you tell the program that this is my backbone curve, and whatever the cyclic behavior I am giving, it should always actually it should be encompassed by that backbone curve. So whatever cyclic behavior you are giving, it is always sticking to that backbone, it is always going back to that backbone and then come back. So that's why it is called the backbone curve. Actually yes, if you talk about only this curve, it will be the backbone curve, but when you say complete action versus deformation behavior, it includes both backbone as well as hysteretic behavior, right. So for single degree of freedom systems, you have actually started from the free vibration response and then forced vibration response, and in that you considered harmonic loading, periodic loading, impulse loading, and then finally the general dynamic loading. So that general dynamic loading now enables you to handle the case of earthquake also or wind also, right. So if you can handle any general dynamic loading using either Duhamil's integral or step by step direct integration, it means that you can now handle the real cases also. The issue is that now your structure, single degree of freedom system, is very simple. So there are very limited kind of real structures which can actually be modeled as single degree of freedom system, like a water tank or a one-story building, or maybe a canopy, watchtower for example, because the assumptions which we made in that single degree of freedom systems are that all the mass of the structure is lumped at one location only. So mass is not distributed along the height. The stiffness is just represented by just few supporting columns, and their resultant stiffness is represented by the symbol K, and then there is no other degree of freedom allowed in your structure, no vertical degree of freedom. Your structure, single degree of freedom system, can only vibrate in one lateral direction, right. So now since we have covered all dynamic loadings, now we will take a step forward, that we will try to make our structure a bit more realistic. So this is where the discrete multiple degree of freedom systems come in. So we are talking about in this chapter discrete multiple degree of freedom systems, which means that our mass now will not be assumed to locate only at one location, but at more than one location, and each of that mass may have its own degree of freedom now, right. So we will be having a system which is a little bit more realistic compared to that single degree of freedom system, but still may not be very accurate to represent the real structures with distributed masses and with distributed stiffness. For example, for a 3-story building, it may be a reasonable assumption to assume that the mass of that building is located only at 3 places, the 3 floor levels, and we just can lump the mass at 3 levels. So, discrete multiple degree of freedom systems may have a mass which can be assigned at more than one location, discrete locations. But for example, you have a silo, for example, a silo structure or a cylindrical structure, which has all continuous mass right from base up to the full height. This kind of a structure may not be idealized as a discrete multiple degree of freedom system, because it has a continuous mass and a continuous stiffness. You cannot simply assume it to locate at one certain or many certain locations. So, in a sense, it can be assumed as a structure with infinite degrees of freedom, because it has a distributed mass. But for a 3-story building, it may be reasonable to assume that it has the total mass located only at 3 locations, where there are 3 heavy floor levels, right. So, we can just sum the total mass and assume it to locate at 3 levels only, because most of the dead load and most of the mass is actually located at those 3 levels, if you just ignore the mass of those supporting columns. So, in this chapter we are going to talk about discrete multiple degree of freedom systems and not continuous structures. This is an example of a structure which is a continuous structure. So, maybe we will have a separate chapter for continuous structures, but let us start with discrete structures. So, for the purpose of demonstration, let us assume a very simplest idealization of a multi-story building, where the mass is only located at floor level. M1, M2, M3 up to Mn are the story masses, and the sum of all the supporting columns at different levels. For example, at first story, the sum of these 4 supporting columns, the sum of their stiffnesses is, let us say, represented by K1 and then K2 and up to Kn, for example. So, this number K actually is representing the sum of the stiffnesses of all columns at that level, right. So, let us invoke few assumptions here, that columns supporting the floor systems are massless. All the mass are only located at certain levels, floor levels. The entire mass of a structure is concentrated at only the floor levels. The floor systems and beams itself, they are rigid, whereas the columns are flexible to lateral deformation but rigid in vertical direction. Just like single degree of freedom system, for this simple mathematical representation of a multi-story building, we assume that columns are they are rigid in vertical direction. So, there is no up down movement of floor, and the floor itself, for example, this one which I am just highlighting, itself is rigid. So, there is no internal stretching or internal elongation or compression in that floor. So, it is a rigid floor, right. The structure is supported on a rigid ground. So, these are all 4 assumptions which we make here to idealize a multi-story building. Still, some of the assumptions may not hold true for some real structure, but at least this representation is better than a single degree of freedom system. So, another symbol for this may be like this, that you have some M1 with some K1 stiffness, and then it is connecting with M2 with some K2 and so on, maybe M3, K3 and so on, like that, right. So, this is our discrete multiple degree of freedom system model, a very simple multi-story building, right. So, let us try to derive the equation of motion for this kind of a system. Sometimes this model is also called as the shear building model. shear building model, because it is very useful in demonstrating some of the basic concepts in structural dynamics. Its primary mode of deformation is shear mode, and therefore it is called as the shear building, sometimes also referred to as the stick building model. So just like single degree of freedom system, this kind of a regular multiple degree of freedom system is sometimes used to convey the concepts of structural dynamics. So any mj in this is representing the mass of any jth floor, and kj is the lateral stiffness of the jth story. So k is actually the story stiffnesses, and story stiffness is defined as the sum of all stiffnesses of the supporting elements, right. So currently we have only columns, so the sum of all columns. So our structure, this multi-story building, is linear, which means the relationship between story shear or story force and story deformation is linear forever, and the slope of that line is the story stiffness, right. So it is a linear system, it is not a non-linear system. So the story stiffness is defined as the force required to produce a unit deformation in that story, right. So if we want to derive the equation of motion for this kind of a simple building, we will use the dynamic equilibrium approach. Actually there are two approaches to derive the equation of motions for multiple degree of freedom systems. One is called the equilibrium approach. I will just explain that at the end, but let's introduce them now. One is called equilibrium approach, and second is called energy approach. So as the name indicates, in the first approach you apply the equilibrium equation to your structure, and that equilibrium equation becomes the equation of motion. Just like single degree of freedom system, you apply the D'Alembert's principle, and this gave you the mu dot dot plus cu dot plus ku equal to p of t. So similar thing we can do it with our multiple degree of freedom system also, but this is only applicable, or it only works for very simple kind of multiple degree of freedom systems, where you can cut a section from your structure and apply equilibrium. For a relatively more complex multiple degree of freedom system, for different kinds of complex geometries which are not similar to a multi-story building, you have to go for the energy approach, right. So I will explain both of these approaches to formulate the governing equation of motion. For first case, equilibrium approach, I will be using that simple shear building model, right. But for more general case, I will be going for energy approach maybe in the next class. So currently let's go for the equilibrium approach first, and for the purpose of demonstration, let's assume a two-story building, a 2 degree of freedom structure. So still in our idealization we are not considering vertical degrees of freedoms, we are not considering rotational degrees of freedoms, right. So ideally if it is a frame, if it is a two-dimensional frame, each point in that two-dimensional frame should have 3 degrees of freedom, 2 translations and 1 rotation. But actually we have kind of deleted those 2 degrees of freedom. So let's say if this is a point here, this point actually have 3 degrees of freedom, 2 translations, maybe let me call it as maybe x, y and r, 2 translations and 1 rotation. If it is a 2-dimensional frame, if it is a 3-dimensional frame, then it should have 6 degrees of freedom, 3 translations and 3 rotations. But currently for the purpose of making this mathematical model, we are not considering r, we are not considering y. So the only degree of freedom available to this mass m2 is 1 translation, which is represented here as u2, and here also 1 translation which is represented as u1. So overall this is a 2 degree of freedom structure, right, 2 degree of freedom structure, because you need to have u1 and u2 at any time instant to plot the deformed shape of this structure. So, at least two numbers are required to actually visualize its deformed shape at any time instant. So, it is a 2 degree of freedom structure, and at each of the degree of freedom there can be an applied loading. Now, P1 and P2 are the two applied loadings, M1 and M2 are the two lumped masses, and K1 and K2 are the two stiffnesses, let us say. With this notation, let us try to find the equilibrium equation, and that will become the governing equation of motion. So, let us cut the section. Let us cut first section here. This is simply representing the story number 1 and 2, right. So, we have one section here, this will give us this free body diagram. Another section here, this will give us this second free body diagram. So, M1 and M2 will develop inertial forces. Currently, by the way, we are not considering damping, right. So, there is no damping, this is undamped case for the sake of simplicity. So, only inertial force Fi2 and Fi1, and there will be elastic restoring force in those columns. So, let us call the elastic restoring force of this column and this column combined, let us call it as Fs2, right. And for the second free body diagram, we will have two elastic restoring forces, one from this cut and second from this cut. So, let us call them as Fs1A and Fs1B, right. Fs1 corresponds to the elastic restoring force experienced by story 1, and A and B are representing two different cuts. So, this is A, section A, this is section B. So, Fs1 is because of that section cut, Fs1B is actually because of that section cut, right. So, these are the two free body diagrams which we will be obtaining if we have two sections passing through two stories. The inertial force and elastic restoring force for the second story, they should be, if the applied loading at a particular instant is towards right hand side, these two should be towards the left hand side, right, because they are opposing the effect of applied loading. So, there are three forces in our first free body diagram. Now, in order to maintain equilibrium, if we have one section and if we have one force towards left hand side, we should have the second force which should be equal and opposite. So, the Fs1A should be towards right hand side and Fs1A should be actually equal to Fs2, right, in order to have equilibrium at that section cut A. This Fs1B is actually representing the elastic restoring force offered by the bottom story columns, and obviously they should be opposite in direction with P1, with respect to P1. So, if P1 is towards right hand side, the columns will want the mass to come back to its original position, so it should be left hand side. So, the sign convention and the notation is clear or not? Is it clear? So, both of these free body diagrams are clear. So, the only point to consider is, or only point to look at is this thing, that Fs2 and Fs1A will be opposite in direction, because they are the two forces which are because of that section A, section cut A, right. So, let us now apply the equilibrium of forces in the only available direction, the lateral direction, for both of these sections, and those equations will actually become our equation of motion. So, it should be actually Fi2 plus Fs2 should be equal to P2 of t. Obviously, these forces will be the function of time also, because they are dynamic forces. So, the first figure will give you this equation, equation 1, let us say, right. So, Fi2 and Fs2 are on the left hand side, P2 is on the right hand side. The second equilibrium equation will give you, for example, it will be Fi1 plus Fs1B minus Fs1A should be equal to P2 of t, right? P1, sorry, P1, yes. So this is our equation 2. We will see later that this equation 1 and 2 will become our equation of motion. So this is equation 1, everyone is clear about that. This is equation 2, is it clear? Yes. Now let us put the values also. Let us first work out the Fs1b, this thing, the elastic restoring force offered by the bottom story columns. These columns are displaced by a deformation equal to u1. So if we multiply k1 with u1, this should be the elastic restoring force for this Fs1b, right? So Fs1b is clear, it should be k1 into u1, because whenever you want to calculate elastic restoring force, you should see that what is the net deformation which those columns are going to have, and that should be multiplied with the stiffness of those columns. This will become the elastic restoring force. So Fs1b is okay, this is k1 u1. Now let us see Fs2, this one. This is the elastic restoring force offered by second story column. Now the second story is actually being deformed equal to u2, but the base of the second story columns are also being deformed equal to u1. So the net deformation which your second story columns are going to deform is u2 minus u1, right? So this is the deformation which should be multiplied with k2 to make the second story elastic restoring force. So therefore we have Fs2 equal to k2 into u2 minus u1. This is also okay, right? And we now know that this Fs2 should be equal to Fs1a in order to have that continuity, or in order to have that equilibrium. So whenever you cut a section, if one force is in that section is towards that side, the other should be equal and opposite to the other side, right? So the Fs1a actually should be equal to k2 u2 minus u1, right? But its direction will be opposite. So therefore you have minus here. So the magnitude is same. So these three equations, everyone is clear? Yeah, yes, you can think of it like this, that Fs1a is in the direction of P1. Actually, see those columns which are on top of M1 mass, they are not actually providing resistance against P1. The columns, these two columns, the bottom story columns are actually providing resistance, right? So if for example mass M2 have a deformation U2 and the second story columns are going towards right hand side, they will obviously want the M1 also to go on the right hand side, right? So you may think of it like that, but actually mathematically we can say that since these two forces, this one and this one, they are coming from the same section cut, and one is towards left hand side, the other should always be towards right hand side, so that their sum will always be 0, and therefore we have the equilibrium at that section cut, right? But you can also think of it like that. So we are clear with equation 1 and 2, which are our equation of motions. So 1 and 2 are our equilibrium equations. 3, 4 and 5 we have actually worked out the quantities which should be put in the equilibrium equation. Now Fi1 and Fi2 are simply m1 u1 dot dot and m2 u2 dot dot, because inertial force is actually depending on the absolute acceleration. See, the elastic restoring force is depending upon the relative deformation between top and bottom story or bottom column, top and bottom point of your column. So you have to multiply k with the net deformation. But for inertial force, it should be simply multiplied with the absolute acceleration. So Fi2 should be m2 into u2 dot dot. Fi1 should be this one, should be simply m1 into u1 dot dot, right? So inertial force is not dependent on the relative value of deformation or relative acceleration, it is dependent on absolute acceleration, right? So we are having all of these quantities, so let's put them in equation 1 and 2 and see how the resulting equation looks like. So we have these fi1 and fi2 already available. Let's put them. So equation 1 and 2 will be changed into equation 8 and 9. Actually this was equation 1, I think, previously, and this was equation 2. So we have fi2 is now replaced by this thing, and this whole thing is fs2 is equal to p2 of t, right. Similarly, the equation 2 will also be m1 u1 dot dot plus k1 u1 plus k2 u1 minus u2. So what they did is actually u2 minus u1 is now changed to u1 minus u2, and this one is changed to plus, right. So this is actually fi1 plus this thing is fs1 fs1b this one, plus actually there should be minus fs1a equal to p1 of t. So what they did is fs1a was actually k2 into u2 minus u1. So they changed into u1 minus u2, and this minus is changed to plus now, right. So everyone is clear with equation 8 and 9. So let's now try to, because these are two equations, by their composition we can see that we can summarize them or represent them into one matrix equation, which is equation 10. If you multiply, carry out that multiplication in equation 10, you will see that you will get two equations which are actually equation 8 and 9. So you can condense these two equations into one matrix equation. How? You can make one m1 0 0 m2 matrix being multiplied by u1 dot dot u2 dot dot. When you carry out that multiplication, you will see that you will get the first term of both equations, m1 u1 dot dot plus 0 into mu2 dot dot. Similarly 0 into u1 dot dot plus m2 into u2 dot dot. So this multiplication will give you these two terms, first term of equation 8 and 9. So these two terms are being added to some additional terms. So let's have a plus sign here, and then again k1 k2 are being multiplied differently with u1 and u2. So let's have a k matrix in between which is multiplied with u1 and u2, and let's arrange the entries such that when we carry out that multiplication we get this thing and this thing, right. And that is actually, you will see that u1 is being multiplied by k1 as well as k2. So let's have a k1 plus k2 here, and u2 is being multiplied by minus k2, because this is minus and this is k2. So let's have a minus k2 here. So when you multiply that row with this column, you will get this whole thing, right. Similarly in the second row, let's have minus k2, because this is being multiplied with the u1, and then k2, right. So let's call this matrix as the k matrix, let's call this matrix as the m matrix, let's call this vector as the u dot dot vector, let's call this vector as the u vector, and this should be equal to p1 and p2. So let's have a new vector here, p1 p2. So let's call this vector as the p vector, the vector containing all the applied loadings, right. So we can condense this equation 8 and 9 into one matrix equation, which is equation 10. So actually there are two equations summarized or combined into one equation. So we can call this, we can also represent this as the mass matrix times acceleration vector plus k matrix times the displacement vector is equal to the applied loading vector, p vector, right. So u is a vector now represented by bold symbol. So u vector is actually this vector, u dot dot vector is actually the story accelerations, these are story displacements, these are the story forces, applied forces. Mass matrix of the structure and K matrix of the structure, right. So equation 11 is same as equation 10, but in a different notation, right. So now M is a 2 by 2 matrix, K is a 2 by 2 matrix, P is a 2 by 1 vector, U and U dot, U double dot are the 2 by 1 vectors, right. 2 is the degree of freedom. So we can generalize this formulation which we have just seen for 2 degree of freedom system. Even if there is a 10 degree of freedom system, if it follows the same pattern, the equation will come up to be the same, right. The only difference will be that now you will have 10 p values. So the p vector will be 10 by 1, the mass matrix will be 10 by 10, K matrix will be 10 by 10, U and U dot dot vectors are 10 by 1 vectors, right. So in general, if you have any n story building, and if the displacements of each story are represented by u1, u2, u3 up to un, where each of this quantity is actually a time function. So I should have written here as function of time, like that, right. And if each of that story is being applied by applied force p1, p2, p3 up to pn, so we have a external force vector p vector. We can arrange the story masses in a diagonal manner, because we have seen in a 2-story building that mass matrix have a pattern, and that pattern is that the story masses are arranged in a diagonal manner and all the off diagonal terms are 0, right. K matrix also have a pattern, and that pattern is that first story is connected to second story. If I start from bottom, so we should have K1 plus K2 and then minus K2, and then this is the second story. If second story was connected by a third story, you have a 3-story building, there should be a plus K3 and then this should be K3, right. And then keep on adding more number of stories up to n story, you can follow the same pattern for the K matrix. So you will see that there will be a band, because this now will be minus K3, right, and this will become 0. This entry will become 0. So there will be a 3 by 3 matrix for a 3-story building, right. So there will be a band which will be having values depending upon the connectivity of stories, and then other than that band all the entries will be 0. So this is the mass matrix, all the off diagonal terms will be 0 up to mn, and this is the K matrix for any nth story building. All the other entries which are not mentioned, they are 0. So minus K2, minus K2, minus K3, minus K3. Actually, whatever values you have here, you will have the same there. So at a particular time, you only need to formulate half of the matrix, the other half is same. So if it is minus K2 here, here also you have minus K2. So the transpose will be same thing. So it means that for any general multi-story building, which is following our assumptions that it is mass is assumed to be located only at certain levels and only lateral degrees of freedom, we can simply formulate its M and K matrices, and then we can try to solve this governing equation of motion. And the governing equation of motion, the general form is mu dot dot plus Ku is equal to P of t. It have the same form as the single degree of freedom system, but now M is not one number but a mass matrix, and it has the order degree of freedom by degree of freedom, right. K have a form, K is now a matrix of the order degree of freedom by degree of freedom, and we already know what this K matrix will be if we have a very simple kind of a building, right. If we don't have rotational degrees of freedom and vertical degrees of freedom, we can simply formulate it manually also. Similarly, mass matrix we can simply formulate manually also. P of t is degree of freedom by 1, this is a vector, and u and u dot are also degree of freedom by 1, right. If you add damping, the same sequences or same steps will be followed, and you will have a new term here C u dot, where C is called as the damping matrix, degree of freedom by degree of freedom. And currently, by the way, you don't have any idea about how we can formulate this damping matrix, but we will have a separate chapter maybe about it, or one session about it. But generally you can just for now think of it as a square matrix, which is a representation of overall damping of multiple degree of freedom system. So that small c is now replaced by the C matrix, right. U dot is the velocity vector, story velocities, right. So it is against degree of freedom by 1. So equation 11 is a more complete form of equation of motion. So one thing before I actually introduce you to the second approach for formulating the you can say second approach for the formulation of equation of motion. Let's think now that we have a multiple degree of freedom system, a discrete multiple degree of freedom system, which have vertical degrees of freedom as well as rotational degrees of freedom, right. So what will happen actually, how this will change our mathematical formulation? Will equation 11 change? No, because you will have more degrees of freedom and they will be reflected in the K matrix, C matrix and M matrix, right. So imagine a structure, let me have a 2-story building. Currently for our simple formulation, it should have a 2 degree of freedom structure, and then actually it should have a 2 by 2 mass matrix, 2 by 2 K matrix, and similarly 2 by 1 U vector, U dot dot vector, U dot vector and P vector, right, all will be 2 by 1. Now let us assume that I increase degrees of freedom, and instead of having 1 degree of freedom at each level, let us have 2 degrees of freedom. So at this level I have, let us say, degree of freedom 1, 2, and here we have 3 and 4. Now the applied loading can be applied at 4 locations, in fact 2 locations, but in 4 possible ways. P1 of t can be applied in this direction, P1 of t. P2 of t can be applied in vertical direction or downward direction, whatever is the direction, but in the vertical direction. So we can have in this structure, we can have P2 of t, P2 of t. Similarly, we can have P3 of t and also one P4 of t. So there can be 4 forces which can be applied to this structure, because it has 4 degrees of freedom. At maximum we can apply 4 forces, each corresponding to a degree of freedom. Similarly, the displacement values will also be 4. You require at least 4 numbers at any particular time instant to plot the deformed shape of this structure. You require all 4, U1, U2, U3 and U4, right. So actually your mass matrix will be 4 by 4, K matrix will be 4 by 4, all vectors will be 4 by 1, right. So actually you have to provide mass corresponding to lateral direction and corresponding to vertical direction. Obviously it will be same mass, right. So if you have M1, same mass will act in x direction, same mass will act in y direction, but actually you have to provide a mass matrix of 4 by 4, right. Now let us add another degree of freedom, which is rotational degree of freedom. So each story may have 3 degrees of freedom. Now each floor can move in lateral direction, can move in upward, downward direction, and can rotate also. So the formulation will still be same, equation 11 will still be valid. All you have to have is formulate a mass matrix which will be now 6 by 6, because there will be total 6 degrees of freedom in this structure, right. And K matrix will be 6 by 6 and all the vectors will be 6 by 1, right. And now let us go for the most general case. You have a 2-story building. Actually if you look at this structure, you have 1, 2, 3, 4 unrestrained nodes, Actually you have 6 nodes, but the bottom 2 are restrained already. They are already applied with fixed support, so they cannot move. So you have 4 unrestrained nodes. Each of that node may have 3 degrees of freedom ideally. If it is a 2-dimensional frame, each of that node may have 3 degrees of freedom. So ideally you should have like this 1, 2, 3, then maybe like this 4, 5, 6, then 7, 8, 9, and then this is 10, 11 and 12. So ideally this is, if you distribute those degrees of freedom to each node, this is a 12 by 12 structure. It is 12 degree of freedom structure actually. Now this structure has the ability to simulate internal stretching of beams or floors. This model now has the ability to simulate rotation of all floors. One point can go up in degree of freedom 8, at the same time the other point can go down in degree of freedom 5, let's say. So this is a more general model. It can simulate all those phenomena which our simple model cannot simulate. See, our 2 by 2 structure was not able to simulate up down movement, but this one, the most comprehensive one, which I draw at the bottom, it can simulate many behavior, but it has more degrees of freedom, 12 degrees of freedom actually, right. So our equation 11 will still be valid. All we need to have is to calculate the mass, tributary mass at each node, and then see, for example, this node, the corner node will have half of the mass of this beam, half of the mass of this column, right, and then this will be the mass of this node. The 3 degrees of freedom will actually have that mass, right, and there is a rotational mass also which will be required now and which will be corresponding to that degree of freedom, right. So actually you will be constructing a 12 by 12 mass matrix, 12 by 12, a 12 by 12 K matrix, right. And if you think closely, you actually know how to construct that 12 by 12 K matrix, right. I mean, in structural analysis courses, you know already the direct stiffness method. You know that how to handle a frame structure. It has a local K, and then you assemble based on the degree of freedom connectivity to construct a global K. So that 12 by 12 K matrix is already, you know how it is coming actually. It is coming from FEM, coming from direct stiffness method, right. And mass matrix have a particular order that I already explained. So P of t will be a vector arranging all the applied forces. So let's say if on this 12 by 12 degree of freedom structure, I apply only, let's say, 3 forces. One is the lateral force in this direction, let's call it P1 of t. One is the vertical force on this node, let's call it P2 of t. And let's say we apply a concentrated moment, directly a moment on this node, let's say. So let's call it as P3 of t. P3 of t is actually a moment, right. So let's formulate its 12 by 1 P vector. P of t vector, bold vector, will be what? It will have 12 entries, each corresponding to 1 degree of freedom. So we know that degree of freedom 1 have a translational force P1, so we will have a P1 of t here. Then degree of freedom 2 and 3 have no force, so we will have 0, 0. Then 4 will have no force, 5 will have no force, but 6 will have a rotational force, a moment, which is P3. So 0, 0 P3, and then 7 have no force, but 8 have a force which is minus because it is in the downward direction. So it will be 0 minus P2 of t, and all other remaining degrees of freedom are 0. So maybe 10, 11, 12 are 0, 0, 0. So this will be the 12 by 1 vector, 12 by 1, right. So our main unknown in this equation 11 is what? U vector. Just like u of t was our main unknown, now we have u vector as our unknown, right? So if we can calculate u vector, we can also calculate u dot vector and u double dot vector. So just like we can convert u of t in single degree of freedom system into any other force response like story shear or base shear, base moment, etc. Similarly, we can convert this u vector also into all other force responses, shears and moments in that story, every building, right? So now we have constituted a very simplest idealization of a multi-story building, but now that is enough to relate it to a very complex case. When you construct a real computer model for dynamic analysis, actually this is the equation 11 which is being constructed at back end. When you are actually draw that model, M and K matrices are being constructed at back end, right? So this equation 11 will be the one which will be solved when you say that I am performing dynamic analysis. The solution of equation 11 is actually the dynamic analysis, right? So when you are actually applying different dynamic forces to your computer model, you are actually formulating P vector, right? When you are defining the values of damping, you are actually formulating C matrix, right? The program itself is actually formulating C matrix. So the program is considering the most general case, this one at the bottom. If it is a three-dimensional frame, the program is considering all 6 degrees of freedom per node, right? So if you have a structure containing maybe 20 nodes, so the mass matrix is being constructed as 6 into 20, 120 by 120. K matrix is 120 by 120, right? And u vector, u dot vector, P of t vector are 120 by 1. And this equation 11 is being solved when you run that dynamic analysis, right? So we will start that variational approach or energy approach for formulating the equation of motion, because you know this pattern of mass matrix, diagonal values, K matrix, diagonal values, it will work only for a multi-story stick building. It will not work for, let's say, a structure like let's say I have a mass m supported like this, and it has another column which is connected by a inclined element, another having mass m which is supported by another column, have a spring here. Imagine this kind of a structure which is not following that order of stories. The equation of motion for this kind of a structure may not be easily formulated using equilibrium approach. You cannot simply cut 2 or 3 sections and apply equilibrium and this will be your equation of motion. You have to go for the second approach, which is called variational approach or energy approach. The first approach, which is based on D'Alembert's principle, the quantities which actually are represented in different vectors are displacement, velocity, acceleration, u dot, u double dot, and force, which is P of t. And you need to explicitly consider the dynamic equilibrium for individual components. The internal interaction forces are considered in detail and shown explicitly in free body diagrams. So when you cut a section, you can completely see which forces are being acted. And the motion are described by physical coordinates, physical forces. So you will see what I mean by this, but actually this P vector is containing physical forces. You can visualize them, you can imagine them, they are being applied to your structure. Now in the variational approach, we will be using these concepts. We will be studying actually in next class, but actually we will be using principle of virtual work, Hamilton's principle, Lagrange's equation of motion. Our quantities which we will be dealing with to formulate equation of motions will not be displacement, velocity, acceleration. We will be dealing with work, energy, potential function, virtual work, these kind of concepts. And we don't need to consider the equilibrium for this case. The internal interactions, they are automatically taken into account. So we don't need to draw free body diagrams. And this this variational approach can be applied to both physical coordinates or generalized coordinates, which I will be explaining in the next class. So let's keep our discussion up till here, and the variational approach will be the topic for next session. If you have any questions for now, you can ask now. Basically what I did is that in this top model, I still assume that the floor is rigid. That assumption is still there in this model. Why? Because I am considering only one lateral degree of freedom per floor. So I am not allowing to have any internal stretching or internal compression in this floor or in this floor. So either it is going all on one side or on the opposite side, no internal stretching. So both of these nodes may not, they are not allowed to have different values of lateral deformation. But here when we have distributed degrees of freedom, separate 3 degrees of freedom here and separate 3 here. So now we are allowing to have a relative deformation between these two nodes. So degree of freedom 1 and 10 need not to have same value, right? So there can be internal stretching and compression. So therefore this bottom one is a more comprehensive model. It can simulate internal compression and tension in floors compared to the top one. So top one, which is having 3 degree of freedom per floor, it is at least better than having 1 degree of freedom per floor, but still it miss some phenomena, some behavior, right? So the more general is this one. So now you are actually connected to the computer programs structural analysis also. If you look at equation 11 and relate it to the computer programs. So although we discussed today a very simple case, 1 degree of freedom per floor, but that case is enough for you to get connected to computer programs, because actually you know what it is doing now. It is just the matter of increasing degrees of freedom. Instead of having 1 per floor, it is having 6 per node, right? But still the same concept of mass matrix, same concept of K matrix, same concept of U vector, U dot vector, U double dot vector, P vector, right? So it is still formulating equation 11, the program is still using that. But the difference is that the K matrix can be like 3 million by 3 million, M matrix can be like 3 million by 3 million, but the equation is still equation 11, right? It is just a matter of idealization. It is just the more the sweat, the more the reward. If you idealize it is a structure with more degrees of freedom, the analysis will get more complex, but you will get a more accurate response also, right? So if his question is that if we have, for example, a water tank supported on a very slender column, a long column, first of all this situation may not practically arise. No one will design a cylinder column which is supporting a water tank. But still, if let's say we have this case, it is our choice to model that. For example, people, okay, if it is have bracing also, and the point is which he want to convey is that the mass of that column may not be small enough to get ignored, right? In that case, we may have a few discrete degrees of freedom along their length also. I was telling you that people sometimes have to model a simply supported beam. A beam now itself is a continuous structure, but what they do is that they idealize it with some discrete masses which are located along the length of that beam. So this kind of a model may somehow capture the actual beam behavior. May not be that accurate, but still somehow can capture. So it's again, I would say that it is more the sweat, the more the reward. Actually, any real structure is infinite degree of freedom, if you look at closely, right? So a real structure is a kind of a continuous structure, something which have to be somehow idealized or approximated by discrete multiple degree of freedom system, right? So it's our own choice. It's a compromise between mathematical complexity and the required degree of accuracy, right? See, with all of the complex modeling tools and software programs available, there is no need to actually nowadays idealize our structure with very crude kind of structural models. Now the computer programs allow you to have as many degrees of freedom as you like. So mostly the people will go for the most comprehensive case, unless you want some conceptual understanding. I mean, the simple models like this, they are still very effective to develop understanding or develop the feel of your structure. But as far as the real computer programs are there, they allow you to have millions of degrees of freedom, and they just ETABS now 3 million equations in 1 second. So it can solve 3 million equations in 1 second. So which means that you can have as many degrees of freedom as you like for these kind of structures, right? But the conceptual simplicity which is lost in all of this, that is something which you may refer to if you want to have that understanding. So a point comes when more sophistication doesn't mean more understanding or more accuracy. So for example, I sometimes give an example that, for example, the tendency for all of the you can say new generation of structural engineers to add as much as complexity in finite element models as they like. If there is any small change in the cross section size or geometry or any other you can say thing or a feature in your building, they would like to actually model that feature in ETABS or SAP or any other program, right? But that may not be actually contributing to accuracy, or they may not be actually even contributing to understanding, right? So it's your own choice, your own compromise, that how much complexity you may want in your model, which your program can handle. The results are manageable. All of these things actually tell you how much level of sophistication you may have to decide. So the modeling scheme for a real project is actually a big issue. What modeling scheme should be adopted? Just take the case of soil structure interaction, for example. Most people want fixed support, that's all. But someone can say that we should model soil also. Someone can say that we should model soil plus foundation also. Someone can say we should model soil with spring elements. Someone can say we should model soil with solid elements. Someone should say that we should model soil as a continuum. All of these options are modeling options. They are available in programs. They are available for you. So you have to just have some cut down. You have to just say that, okay, this much is the level of sophistication I want in my analysis, not beyond that, right? So it is a decision for you, right? And there are some other assumptions also which you may make to simplify your model. Later I will discuss, for example, the rigid diaphragm assumption, which can constrain all the nodes at one particular floor level so that they can move together like one diaphragm, and static condensation, some other issues related to structural modeling.